I was halfway across the world, in the middle of the Qatari desert, when my marriage ended with a single email. It was 2 in the morning when my laptop pinged. I thought it was another update from the construction site, maybe a safety report. But instead, there it was, an email from Evelyn, my wife of nearly 40 years. Nathaniel, I've filed for divorce. I've already withdrawn the funds from our joint account. Don't contact me. Attached below was a screenshot from our bank, available balance, $0. For a long minute, I didn't move. The desert wind outside howled against the thin metal walls of my quarters, but inside me, there was only stillness, cold, perfect stillness. She'd moved out of our home in California, I would later learn, and moved someone else in, a man named Mark Spencer. I didn't call her. I didn't scream. I simply stared at the glow of my screen, then typed my reply. I understand, Evelyn. I closed the email, opened a folder buried deep on my computer desktop labeled, Plan K in case of betrayal. And in that moment, I wasn't broken anymore, I was awake. The desert has a way of stripping a man down to what he really is. Out here, without noise or company, you learn whether your spine is steel or sugar. After I answered Evelyn with 3 words, I understand, Evelyn, I sat back on the narrow bunk and let the desert wind scrape along the aluminum siding of my quarters. It sounded like a hand testing the seams, looking for a weakness. I didn't intend to give it one. I brewed instant coffee I didn't want, because any task keeps your hands from doing something foolish, like dialing a number you shouldn't. The steam rose and vanished. I thought about the 40 years behind us, starter apartment, used furniture, a mattress on the floor, the night the power went out and we ate cold soup by candlelight, laughing because it felt like camping. I thought about how we promised each other that if money ever came, it wouldn't change who we were. Money always tries. I opened the construction feed on my laptop just to hear familiar noise, cranes swinging, diesel engines coughing awake before dawn, men cursing in 3 languages about the same stubborn bolt. The rhythm grounded me. Then I minimized the feed and pulled up the home network portal I'd installed years ago, cameras, thermostat, door locks, a garage sensor I used to reset from overseas when Evelyn forgot to close it. I told myself I was only checking the house. Truth is, I wanted a fact strong enough to crush the story running wild in my head. The living room camera came up first. Sunlight angled across the hardwood I refinished by hand the summer. My knees reminded me I wasn't 30 anymore. There were new shoes by the door, size 12s I didn't own. A gym bag with a logo I'd never seen. A red coat hanging where her blue cardigan used to be. It's the small replacements that hurt the most. You feel them like grit in your teeth. I clicked through cameras, kitchen, hallway, back patio. On the patio, our teak table, my anniversary gift to her, was covered with takeout containers and 2 wineglasses. One had a lipstick ring. The other had a chalky residue like protein powder. I didn't need a close-up of his face to know who Mark Spencer was. I knew his shape. I knew his effect. Men like that are born cliffhangers, they make a woman feel like something dangerous is about to happen. Eventually, the only dangerous thing that happens is the bill. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Somewhere between the first insult and the last goodbye, I must have learned restraint. I took a picture of the screen with my phone and dropped it into a folder that had once held our family vacation photos. I didn't rename the folder. I didn't dress any of this up. Across the room, the suitcase I'd never fully unpacked leaned against the wall like a loyal dog. There was a time I'd come home and Evelyn would sit on that suitcase while I told her stories from the field, winds that could peel paint, heat that could buckle steel, crews who'd follow you anywhere if you looked them in the eye at 4 a.m. And told them the truth. Somewhere along the way, my stories stopped being enough. Maybe I stopped telling them. Maybe she stopped listening. Maybe it's both and neither. I opened a different file, Plan K in case of betrayal. It wasn't a revenge manual. It was a collection of instructions I wrote in a hotel lobby years ago when a friend lost everything in a divorce that looked, at the start, a lot like mine. At the time, Evelyn called it paranoid. I called it prudence. I never thought I'd need it. That's the thing about fire extinguishers, you hope they collect dust. Step 1, don't respond emotionally. Done. Step 2, preserve evidence. Already in motion. Step 3, call Catherine. I stared at the note for a long beat. My sister doesn't ask why. She asks how quickly. Before I dialed, I watched the living room feed again. I don't know what I expected to see: an apology in the carpet. A sign this was just a bad dream. The feed gave me nothing back but pixels and quiet. It's not the house's job to lie to you. I called Catherine. She answered on the first ring. Nate? It's time, I said. She didn't sigh. She didn't gasp. She just went to work. You want me to trigger the King Estate Trust? Every clause. House, vehicles, brokerage, insurance riders, the works. You understand what that means for her. Not for you, for her. That's my sister. She keeps the scales balanced even when you want to throw a fist on one side. It means I'm not leaving the front door unlocked after someone already picked the lock, I said. I'll need your latest pay stubs and the revocable trust addendum. You have them in the secure drive, folder, Kestrel. Password hasn't changed. Copy that. Give me 2 hours. I hung up and stared at my coffee. It had gone cold. Most things do if you ignore them long enough. There was a picture on my desk of Evelyn and me at a county fair 30 years ago. She was wearing a straw hat and eating cotton candy, pretending not to hate the stickiness. I kept the picture not because of the romance but because of the look on her face, hungry, hopeful, daring the future to notice her. I fell in love with that look. The woman in the email had a different look. It read like a ledger: totals, withdrawals, nothing left in the notes column. I wrote 3 lines in my notebook paper, because paper can't be hacked. Take back the facts. Protect the house. Protect myself from the man grief turns me into. On the worksite, a supervisor radioed with a question about a delayed crane. I answered, flagged a safety check, authorized a shift in the lifting plan. The muscles that build a life don't care that your heart's been vandalized. They only know the next task. When the call ended, I switched to our bank app. Joint checking, 0. Savings, transferred to a new account I didn't recognize. I screenshotted the transaction list, flagged 3 transfers into an account ending 4319. The memo line on the largest one read, reimbursement. That word did something strange in my chest. Reimbursement suggests a debt. I hadn't realized my existence had accrued interest. My impulse was to pound out a message that would scorch the fiber optic cable between Qatar and California. I didn't. Instead, I composed a new email, simple and clean, addressed to the bank's fraud department, copying my attorney and Catherine. Dear team, please flag and freeze all accounts connected to Nathaniel R. King pending review for potential elder financial abuse and unauthorized withdrawals from a joint account by a non-authorized party. Attached are statements and the trust instrument establishing King Estate Trust, see clauses 4, 7, and 12. I am overseas and available by phone at the number below. I read it twice. Even, factual, unafraid. I hit send. I checked the home feed one last time. The hallway light was on. The bedroom door, our bedroom, was closed. I muted the audio. There are things a man doesn't need to hear to know. I shut the laptop and let the room go dark. The wind picked up, rattling something loose on the roof. I pictured a single screw working itself out under the pressure of 1,000 small gusts. That's how marriages end, I think, not by a hurricane, but by ordinary weather, daily and relentless, until the seam you swore would hold finally doesn't. I lay back and closed my eyes. I didn't pray for her to come back. I didn't pray for the clock to rewind. I prayed for two things, a steady hand and a quiet mind. If I could keep those, the rest would follow. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, I remembered something I taught young engineers and somehow forgot for myself: when a structure is compromised, you don't argue with the damage. You shore the load, you cut the rot, you save what can still be saved. Catherine's text pinged, Phase 1 initiated. Title transfers queued. Sit tight. I smiled at the phrasing. Sit tight. I'd been doing that for 40 years. This time, I was doing it with my eyes open. When you spend decades building something, whether it's a bridge, a house, or a marriage, you start to believe the foundation will hold simply because you laid it yourself. That's the lie every builder tells himself. Foundations don't last because you built them. They last because you maintain them. I learned that too late. The next morning, I woke to the same desert wind and the same emptiness that follows a controlled demolition. My phone buzzed with an overseas timestamp. Catherine. She never wasted words. Phase 1 complete. Property secured. Trust protection engaged. I exhaled slowly. She had done it. The King Estate Trust, dormant for nearly a decade, was now alive again. Every clause, every protection, every hidden legal wall erected in silence. The idea for the trust hadn't come from paranoia. It came from a memory. Years ago, when I was in my 50s, an old coworker of mine, Robert Gaines, lost everything in a divorce. He'd built a small construction firm from nothing. His wife left him and took half the company. By the time the court finished with him, the man couldn't afford his own pickup truck. I remember him saying to me, "Nate, never confuse love with lack of boundaries." That stuck. So, on a cold December night 8 years ago, I sat down with Catherine, and we drew up the King Estate Trust. Evelyn signed as a secondary beneficiary, in case of my death, but not as an owner. She never asked to read the fine print, she was too busy decorating for Christmas. Back then, I thought her trust was a kind of love. Now I knew it was negligence. While I waited for the next report from Catherine, I went to the break room. The men were laughing about soccer scores. They didn't notice me come in. I was grateful for that. A broken man stands out more when people are watching. I poured myself black coffee and scrolled through old photos on my phone. Evelyn in her 20s, barefoot, sitting on the hood of our first car, a beat-up Chevy Nova. She was beautiful then, not in a perfect way but in a real way. Her smile had space for joy and doubt at once. We built our life on that smile. Somewhere along the line, she traded it for Botox and filters. It's strange, the things you remember. Not the anniversaries or the vacations, but the small repairs, the leaking faucet we fixed together, the night the oven broke, and she brought home cheap takeout with a grin like it was an adventure. I closed the gallery. That version of her didn't exist anymore. My phone buzzed again, another message, this time from a different number. Evelyn. I know you froze the accounts. This is cruel, Nathaniel. You're embarrassing yourself. No apology. No hesitation. Just accusation. I didn't reply. Silence had more weight than words. Instead, I opened my notebook, the paper kind, the same one I'd started the night before, and began documenting everything. Dates, transactions, copies of emails, even the way she phrased that message. My training as an engineer taught me that every disaster leaves a pattern. And if you map the pattern, you can trace it back to the first crack. That afternoon, I called Catherine back. Evelyn reached out, I told her. She sighed, a slow, deliberate sound. Did she threaten legal action? Not yet. Just moral outrage. She'll get louder before she gets quiet. That's fine. I've worked around explosives. I know how to handle noise. Catherine laughed softly. You always did. Any updates? I asked. The trust is airtight. The house title, the vehicles, and the brokerage accounts are all under protection now. She can't sell or mortgage anything without your signature. Good, I said. What about the joint account? The bank's fraud team has opened an elder financial abuse investigation. You'll need to sign a digital affidavit confirming you didn't authorize the withdrawals. I already did. Then let the system do its job. The less you talk to her, the better. I looked out the small window. The desert sun was fading into that harsh golden color that makes everything look older. She's already talking, I said quietly. To everyone but me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the perimeter of the camp, past the rows of machinery covered in dust, past the humming generators and half-built towers. Every bolt, every weld, every joint told a story of tension and release. When steel bends under stress, you hear it. People, though they break in silence. I thought about the last year before I left for Qatar. Evelyn had started avoiding eye contact at dinner. When I asked about her day, she gave me answers that didn't need questions. Same old, she'd say. I'm fine. I wanted to believe her. But the distance between us was growing like corrosion under paint. Once, I found her sitting in the dark with a glass of wine, scrolling on her phone. When she noticed me, she smiled too fast. Just a late-night movie, she said. But the reflection in her glasses wasn't a movie. It was a message thread. I didn't pry. I thought trust was about not asking. Turns out, trust is about asking at the right time. I returned to my room and opened the camera feed again. Evelyn was on the couch with Mark. He was younger, handsome in that careless, temporary way. She laughed at something he said louder than I'd heard her laugh in years. For a moment, jealousy threatened to rise like acid. Then I felt something heavier, pity. Because I knew how that kind of man ends. Loud. Expensive. Short-lived. I took another screenshot. Evidence wasn't vengeance, it was insurance. Then I did something I hadn't done in months, I prayed. Not for her return. Not for justice. Just for clarity. The next morning, Catherine called again. I've been thinking, she said. If she filed for divorce already, you'll be served soon. You can choose to respond or let her walk into the storm blind. What would you do? I'd let her walk, she replied. Some people only learn from the wreckage they cause. Her words hit harder than I expected. Because I realized, for the first time, I didn't want Evelyn to suffer. I wanted her to see. To see what happens when you confuse love for leverage. To see that the man she tried to ruin still stood straight. And maybe, just maybe, to see the reflection of herself in the wreck she built. I ended the call, packed my tools, and went to work. My crew didn't know it, but every beam we lifted that day felt personal. Every bolt I tightened was one more reminder that even when something's been shaken, it can still stand if you reinforce it right. When the sun went down, I looked out over the half-built framework glowing against the horizon. It looked fragile, incomplete but stable. Kind of like me. The next week crawled by like sand through glass, slow, silent, relentless. I worked, slept, and pretended to eat. My body followed the routine of an engineer, but my mind was already somewhere else, tracing blueprints for justice. By Thursday, Catherine had finished every transfer. She called me late in the evening her time, calm as ever. It's done, Nate. The house, the vehicles, the insurance policies, the savings all under the King Estate Trust. Evelyn has no legal claim. You're safe. Safe. The word felt foreign, almost sarcastic. Safety is a feeling you lose long before the papers prove it. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. I didn't look like a man seeking revenge. I looked like someone who'd finally accepted a truth too big to swallow, that love, when built on comfort, rots quietly until it collapses under its own weight. A few days later, the desert project wrapped for the month, and the company granted us a weekend leave. Most men used their break to drown themselves in bars or call home to talk to kids they barely knew. I spent mine in my quarters, downloading every financial statement from the bank, cross-checking time stamps, tracing where each dollar had gone. I wasn't looking for what she stole. I was looking for when she started planning it. It turned out the withdrawals began months before the email. Small amounts first, subtle enough to escape notice, $200 here, $300 there, labeled as household expenses. Then came larger ones, thousands at a time, justifying a lifestyle that didn't exist until Mark entered the picture. He was clever, I'll give him that. He knew how to hide behind her smile. By the third night, I needed a voice other than my own thoughts, so I called Colonel Raymond, my old friend and the only person on this side of the world who knew what was happening. He answered with his usual gravelly humor. "Nate, you sound like a man who's been counting ghosts." "I'm counting receipts," I said. "Same thing." He'd been through his own disaster, a wife who drained his pension while he was deployed. When I told him about the trust activation and the bank freeze, he let out a low whistle. "You always were the quiet planner," he said. "Most men would have flown home and burned the house down." "I don't want flames," I replied. "I want memory. I want her to remember the day she realized she underestimated me." He laughed softly. "That's colder than fire, brother." That night, I reopened the camera feed one more time. The living room was dimly lit, the air thick with late-night quiet. Evelyn sat on the couch, scrolling her phone while Mark paced behind her, shirtless, waving his arms like a man who enjoyed hearing himself talk. Their voices came through the microphone, faint but clear enough. "Relax," Mark said. "He's not gonna do anything. He's old, Evelyn. He'll cave." "You don't know him," she said, her tone sharper than I'd heard in years. "Nathaniel doesn't cave. He calculates." "Then why isn't he here?" "Because he's waiting for me to feel guilty," she said bitterly. "And I don't." She didn't see him roll his eyes. "I did." "Guilt doesn't pay bills," Mark muttered. And just like that, I saw the beginning of her end. It's strange sometimes the moment you stop loving someone is the same moment you remember exactly why you once did. She was intelligent, perceptive, intuitive. Even in betrayal, she could still read me. She was right. I wasn't angry. I was calculating. The next morning, I drafted a message to Catherine. Proceed to Phase 2. Prepare formal notification to all financial institutions of potential fraud activity and include proof of forged authorization signatures. I'll handle the affidavit from here. She replied instantly. Understood. Evelyn will get the notice within 48 hours. I could almost hear her voice smirking through the text. 2 days later, I got confirmation, the accounts were officially frozen pending investigation. Evelyn's access was revoked, her debit cards declined, her world quietly shrinking. I didn't imagine her panic, I didn't need to. I knew Evelyn too well. She hated losing control more than losing money. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. Video call request, Evelyn. For a full minute, I just stared at the notification. Then I accepted. Her face appeared flawless, makeup, perfectly lit, the look of someone who still thought appearances could rewrite reality. "Nathaniel," she began, voice trembling with restrained fury, "I just tried to pay the contractor for the kitchen remodel, and the card was declined." "What did you do?" I leaned back, keeping my tone even. "Nothing illegal. Nothing cruel. I simply secured what's mine." "Yours?" she snapped. "Everything we had was built together. Together implies honesty." She laughed sharp, sarcastic. "God, you sound like a judge." "No," I said. "Judges still believe both sides have truth." Her expression cracked, just for a second, and that second was enough. "You can't do this," she whispered. "Evelyn," I said quietly, "I already did." The call ended. She didn't call back. That night, I wrote in my notebook. "She's still fighting for money. I'm fighting for peace. Only one of us can win." Then I closed the notebook and went outside. The desert sky was endless, filled with stars that burned like silent witnesses. The wind was cooler now, less hostile, as if it respected the quiet war I'd declared. I stood there for a long time, thinking about how love and trust age differently. Love can fade and return. Trust once gonitoous and resurrect, it reincarnates into wisdom. When I went back inside, I checked my email. One new message from Catherine. Evelyn's attorney called. "She's threatening to file for divorce again, this time with public exposure. Don't worry. She's cornered. Let her scream." I smiled faintly. Let her. Noise is the last weapon of the defeated. I powered off the laptop and poured myself a small glass of whiskey. For the first time in months, it didn't taste bitter. Because in that moment, I understood something simple and devastating. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. And mine had just begun to work. It took 3 weeks for Evelyn to file the official divorce papers in California. I wasn't surprised. She'd never been one to let things rest quietly. What did surprise me was the tone of her petition, a masterpiece of selective memory. According to her, I had become emotionally abusive, financially controlling, and neglectful. She claimed I'd abandoned her while hoarding marital funds overseas. It's strange reading lies written in legal language. They look cleaner that way, no emotion, just bullet points and timestamps. But every sentence had the same invisible ink, guilt looking for justification. Catherine called as soon as the papers arrived at her office. "I've reviewed her claims," she said. "They're aggressive, but shallow. No real evidence, just her word against the trust documents." "Then she's walking straight into her own trap," I said. "Exactly," Catherine replied. "She's trying to win with noise. But you, Nate, you've built walls out of silence." That made me smile, not out of pride, but out of understanding. Silence is underrated. It's the only weapon that doesn't leave fingerprints. 2 weeks later, I was back in California, sitting in the wooden courtroom that smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. Judge Whitmore, a man who looked like he'd been carved from oak, presided from his bench. Evelyn sat across the aisle with her attorney, a polished man in an expensive navy suit and a face too smooth to trust. Mark wasn't there, apparently. He'd stepped away after the money dried up. Evelyn looked perfect, as always, new haircut, tailored suit, pearls. But beneath the polish, I could see it, panic. Not the loud kind. The kind that hides behind posture and perfume. When the hearing began, her lawyer spoke first. He painted me as a manipulative husband who used complex financial tools to trap his wife. He called me calculating, controlling, and my favorite, emotionally withholding. I didn't flinch. Everything he said was technically true, just not in the way he meant. I was calculating, but only after being robbed. I was controlling, but only what was mine. And emotional withholding? Maybe. But when emotion becomes a weapon, withholding it is self-defense. When it was Catherine's turn, she stood slowly, adjusted her glasses, and spoke like someone reading a manual. No drama. No venom. Just facts. Your Honor, she began, the King Estate Trust was created 8 years ago, long before any marital conflict. It designates Mr. King as the sole trustee and legal owner of all primary assets, with Mrs. King as a contingent beneficiary only in the event of his death. The trust includes a fraud protection clause that automatically freezes accounts in cases of unauthorized withdrawals exceeding 10% of total value. She handed the judge a file, thick, organized, undeniable. The clause was triggered after Mrs. King withdrew over $80,000 in unapproved transfers to an account connected to Mr. Mark Spencer who, records show, received multiple payments labeled as reimbursement. Evelyn's attorney tried to object, but Catherine didn't blink. We also have security footage from the property confirming cohabitation between Mrs. King and Mr. Spencer during the same period, while the legal marriage was still active. The courtroom fell silent, except for the clicking of the judge's pen. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Her eyes darted toward me, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to know, the one who smiled with her eyes before she learned to use them as weapons. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. King, he said evenly, is this information accurate? She hesitated. A beat too long. Then, I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Meaning what, exactly? The judge asked. That I made mistakes, she said softly. But he's punishing me. Judge Whitmore's gaze didn't soften. Mrs. King, protecting one's assets through a legally established trust is not punishment. It's prudence. That word again, prudence. I'd almost forgotten how much I liked it. The rest of the session was quick. The judge dismissed her claims of abuse for lack of evidence. He upheld the trust as valid and binding. Evelyn lost access to the house, the vehicles, and the joint investments. Her only remaining asset was her personal checking account and whatever pride she hadn't already spent. When it was over, she stood abruptly and turned to me. You destroyed everything, she hissed. You made me the villain. I met her eyes. No, Evelyn. You did that when you cast me as the fool. She froze, maybe realizing that line was one she'd used on me years ago during some petty argument. Back then, I'd laughed it off. This time, it landed like a verdict. Outside the courthouse, the air was cooler, quieter. Reporters milled around, but none cared about us. We were just another divorce in a world full of them. Catherine walked beside me, her heels sharp against the pavement. She'll appeal, she said. Let her, I replied. She's already lost the only court that mattered. Which one's that? Mine. We stopped by her car. She looked at me for a long moment. You could have humiliated her. You had enough proof to bury her reputation. But you didn't. I didn't need to, I said quietly. You don't punish someone who's already living with the weight of themselves. That night, back at my small rented apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the papers Judge Whitmore had signed. My name clean. My estate intact. My conscience surprisingly light. But peace is a fragile thing. Even victory feels like loss when it's someone you once loved on the other side of the table. I poured a glass of whiskey, opened the balcony door, and let the California air in. The city hummed indifferent, relentless. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was realizing that wealth doesn't protect you from consequence. I'd learned the same lesson once, but I'd learned it quietly. Now, I wrote a single sentence in my notebook before turning off the light. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs patience. And with that, the storm I'd been waiting for finally began to break, not outside my window, but inside her world. The morning after the court hearing, I woke to the kind of silence that feels earned. No alarms, no emails, no desert wind clawing at metal walls, just quiet. I made coffee the way I used to when life was simple, no sugar, no rush. The mug warmed my hands as I stood by the window of my small apartment. From there, I could see the city stretch awake, people in suits, students with backpacks, joggers chasing the day. Normal life continued, unaware that my own had just been reset. I should have felt relief. But relief, I've learned, doesn't come right after justice. It sneaks in much later, once the noise dies down. My phone buzzed. Catherine. You made the papers, she said. I did. Page 6 of the local section. Businessman protects assets amid contentious divorce. Don't worry, It's dignified. Good, I said. Dignity's all I have left worth keeping. She laughed softly, then hesitated. Evelyn's lawyer contacted me. She's not appealing. She's withdrawing. I froze. Withdrawing? All claims. She signed the settlement. So it's over. Legally, yes. Emotionally? That's your department. Her tone was kind but sharp. Catherine never let me hide behind calmness. That afternoon, I walked down to the marina. I hadn't been there in years. The ocean smelled like rust and salt, two things I understood too well. I sat on a bench and watched the tide roll in, steady and inevitable. It was strange to think how fast everything had changed. A month ago, I had a wife, a house, a joint account, a future that looked like a straight road. Now I had a folder of documents, a red notebook, and a heart that was quieter but heavier. As the waves rolled, I thought of Evelyn. I imagined her in that big, echoing house, walking from room to room without the comfort of noise. I wondered if she looked at the empty spaces where his things used to be: Mark's shoes, his cologne, his laughter. Because he was gone. Catherine had mentioned it casually. He disappeared 2 days after the accounts froze. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Predictable. Men like him never stay for the aftermath. They build their little castles on other people's chaos and leave once the sand starts to collapse. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. But another part, the older, wiser part, didn't. Because pity is the most dangerous form of attachment. It looks like forgiveness, but it keeps you chained to the past. A few evenings later, I received an email from Evelyn. No subject line. No greeting. Just 2 sentences. You win. I hope it was worth it. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Then I wrote. It wasn't about winning. It was about ending. I didn't hit send right away. I read the line over and over until I realized I wasn't writing to her anymore, I was writing to myself. Then I pressed send and closed the laptop. That simple click felt heavier than any signature I'd ever made in a courtroom. The next morning, I drove to our old house. I didn't go inside legally, it was still pending reassignment to the trust, but I stood across the street, watching it like a stranger. The curtains were open. The front yard, once trimmed every Sunday, was now overgrown. The fountain I'd built with my own hands stood still, dry and cracked. Funny how quickly beauty decays when love stops maintaining it. I could have gone inside. I had every right. But I didn't. Because some doors, once closed, are better left sealed. Instead, I pulled a small envelope from my jacket pocket. Inside was a set of old photographs, the first house blueprints Evelyn and I ever drew together, back when our biggest dream was just having a roof that didn't leak. I slipped the envelope into the mailbox and walked away. No note. No explanation. Just memories enough for her to remember what real beginnings looked like. That evening, Catherine dropped by my apartment with Chinese takeout and 2 bottles of beer. She sat across from me, scanning the mess of papers on the table. You're rebuilding, she said. Always, I replied. That's what engineers do. She smiled. You know, you could retire. Live off the trust. Travel. I looked out the window. The skyline shimmered with late light. I'm not done building yet, I said. Maybe not bridges or towers. Maybe just peace. Catherine raised her bottle. To peace, then. The hardest thing to construct. We clinked bottles, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed, not the forced kind that covers hurt, but the real kind that comes when the dust finally settles. Later that night, I sat alone on the balcony with my red notebook. I opened to a fresh page and wrote. There's no such thing as starting over. There's only continuing, but wiser. Then I flipped back to the first page, where I'd written weeks ago, Plan K in case of betrayal. I smiled faintly. Maybe it was time to rename it. Not as a plan for vengeance, but as a manual for survival. I crossed out the title and wrote in bold ink. Blueprint for Freedom. Because that's what it was now, not a list of retaliation steps, but a record of how a man can lose everything and still keep his dignity intact. Before turning in, I checked my messages one last time. There was a text from an unknown number. She's moving out of the house tomorrow. Thought you should know. No name, no context, probably one of the neighbors. I stared at the message, then looked out toward the skyline again. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was packing boxes, each one lighter than the last. And somewhere deep down, maybe she was realizing that not all losses are punishments, some are lessons written in invisible ink. I closed my notebook and whispered a truth I'd waited my whole life to learn. Peace isn't what you find after revenge. It's what remains when you stop needing it. And for the first time since that cursed email in Qatar, I slept without dreams, only silence, soft and complete. 2 months passed. The divorce was finalized. The court records were public. The house, the cars, and the accounts had been reassigned under the King Estate Trust. Everything I had built over 62 years was back where it belonged, legally untouchable, emotionally scarred, but intact. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the moment it happens. They're wrong. The hardest part is the quiet after it's all over, when there's no more battle left, no more adrenaline to numb you, just you and the echo of what used to be. I filled my days with work, projects, and the comforting monotony of blueprints. I spent long evenings at the workshop, building small things that didn't matter: a wooden chair, a model bridge, a clock that ticked just slightly too loud. It was my way of reminding myself that creation still existed after destruction. Catherine stopped by often, pretending to check on me but really checking for me to make sure I was still whole. She'd bring groceries, paperwork, or sometimes just silence, which was better than company. One afternoon, she came in holding an envelope. "You got mail," she said, sliding it across the table. The handwriting froze me familiar, slanted, feminine. Evelyn. I didn't touch it right away. I just stared at it, the way a man stares at a live wire, knowing that one wrong move could shock him back into something he thought he'd escaped. Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Want me to open it?" "No," I said quietly. "If it burns in my hands." She nodded and left me with it. I waited until evening. I poured a small glass of whiskey, sat by the window, and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter on cream stationery, no perfume, no embellishments. Just words. Nathaniel. I don't know what I'm expecting by writing this. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe acknowledgement. Maybe just an answer from the man I once believed was incapable of hate. You were right, I betrayed you. I justified it by calling it freedom, but it was greed. I thought I was reclaiming my youth, proving I could still be wanted. Instead, I just became someone else's distraction. Mark left the week after the accounts froze. He said he didn't do poverty. The irony isn't lost on me. I sold my jewelry, moved into a small apartment. It's quiet here, too quiet. I keep thinking about how, even when you were angry, you were still kind. I didn't see it then. I was too busy mistaking comfort for boredom. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway. Not for me, for you. Because if I stay as the villain in your story, then you'll never really be free either. Evelyn. I sat there for a long time, letter trembling in my hands. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like confession, too late, but honest. The kind that doesn't beg for redemption, just acknowledgement. I folded it back neatly and set it beside my notebook. Then I wrote a reply, not to send, but to speak my piece. Evelyn. I stopped hating you the moment I realized hate was just another form of connection. You took my money, but I let you take my peace. That's on me. What you called boredom was really loyalty. What you called control was protection. You thought I was trying to cage you, but I was only trying to keep what we built safe from the world and maybe from ourselves. You're right, I don't hate you. But forgiveness isn't something I give in words, it's something I live. So here's my truth, I forgive you by moving on. I forgive you by sleeping well at night. I forgive you by remembering the good without craving its return. Be well, Evelyn. Not because you earned it but because I don't need you to suffer for me to heal. Nathaniel. I folded my letter, slipped it into the same envelope, and tucked it into the red notebook, my archive of endings. A few days later, Catherine called again. You sound lighter, she said. Maybe I am. Did you read it? Yes. And? I finally realized forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting them walk away without following them. She was silent for a moment, then said softly, You're starting to sound like a man who's finally free. Weeks passed. I began to rediscover things that had been buried under routine and resentment: morning walks, books I'd forgotten to finish, the smell of rain on the driveway. But sometimes, late at night, I'd still catch myself listening for her footsteps, the faint rhythm of a life that used to orbit mine. And when that happened, I didn't curse it. I simply let it pass, like wind through a half-open window. One Sunday morning, I drove out to the old property one last time. The realtor's sign was gone. The yard had been cleared, the locks changed. The house was now officially part of the trust's foundation, to be turned into a charity project for displaced families, my way of converting pain into purpose. I stood there a long time, looking at the place where everything began and ended. The walls, the windows, the ghost of laughter still echoing inside. Then I whispered, Goodbye, Evelyn, and walked away, not dramatically, not bitterly, but peacefully. Because in the end, closure doesn't come with signatures or settlements. It comes when you can look at the ruins of something you loved and feel gratitude instead of grief. That night, I opened my notebook again and wrote my final words about her. Some people destroy you to free themselves. Others destroy themselves trying to destroy you. The wise just rebuild and let time do the talking. I closed the notebook and smiled faintly. For the first time in months, I didn't dream of revenge. I dreamed of possibility. And when I woke the next morning, the sun felt warmer, not because the world had changed, but because I finally had. The seasons shifted before I realized how much time had passed. The air turned colder, softer, the kind that makes even concrete smell like memory. My beard had gone grayer, my hands rougher, but there was peace in the lines of both. After everything, I didn't move away from California. I stayed. I wasn't hiding, I was rebuilding. The house was gone, the marriage gone, the anger gone. But what remained was something new, something pure, purpose. I'd started a new project, a small, private initiative I called the Reclaim Foundation. It wasn't much at first, just me, a retired engineer with more time than sleep, and a few volunteers. We repaired homes for single parents and elderly folks who couldn't afford contractors. It wasn't charity, it was restitution, a quiet form of justice. Every time I patched a roof or rewired an old kitchen, I felt like I was mending something inside myself too. Because construction had always been my language, and redemption was just another kind of blueprint. Catherine visited the site one afternoon, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect my progress. You're turning into a neighborhood legend, she teased. Half these people think you're some secret millionaire with a heart of gold. I smiled. Secret millionaire's a stretch. Maybe just a man trying to balance the scales. She looked at me for a long time. You already have. Not yet, I said. Balance doesn't mean peace. It just means the weight stopped moving. That night, back at the workshop, I found myself sifting through old boxes I hadn't touched in years. Inside one was a photo of Evelyn and me during our early years. We were both younger, sunburned, laughing, holding blueprints for our first home. I studied that photo for a long time. It didn't hurt anymore. That was the strangest part. Pain had finally lost its edges. I placed the photo in an envelope and labeled it, before. Then I opened my red notebook and added another section, writing in neat, deliberate handwriting. Blueprint for after. Rule 1, never build something that depends entirely on one person's gratitude. Rule 2, never confuse loyalty with silence. Rule 3, when the foundation cracks, fix it or leave it before it collapses. I stopped writing, smiled, and underlined one more sentence. The best revenge is becoming the person you were supposed to be before they broke you. A week later, I got an unexpected visit. I was loading tools into the truck when I saw a familiar car pull up silver Lexus, slightly dented, the same one Evelyn had driven when we were still together. She stepped out slowly. Time had changed her, too. Her once blonde hair had grown darker, her face thinner, her eyes tired in a way makeup couldn't fix. She held a small paper bag in her hands. "Nathaniel," she said softly. I didn't answer right away. The sound of her voice felt foreign but not unwelcome, like hearing an old song you no longer relate to. "I won't stay long," she said. "I just wanted to return something." She held out the bag. Inside was my old wristwatch, the one my father had given me before he died. I took it, turning it over in my palm. "You kept this?" "I shouldn't have. It didn't feel right anymore." She looked around at the workshop, at the volunteers laughing nearby. "You're doing good things, Nate." "I'm just fixing what's broken." She nodded slowly. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, for how small I made you feel. You didn't deserve that." I looked her straight in the eyes. "I didn't. But I'm glad it happened." That caught her off guard. "Glad?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Because I wouldn't be here if it hadn't. Sometimes destruction clears the ground for better construction." For a moment, she smiled, a sad, genuine smile I hadn't seen in decades. "You always did speak in blueprints." "I build better than I destroy," I said. She took a step back, her voice soft. "Goodbye, Nathaniel. Goodbye, Evelyn." She turned, walked back to her car, and drove off. No tears. No second glance. Just closure, clean and wordless. That night, I sat at my desk and placed the wristwatch beside the red notebook. The watch had stopped ticking, but I didn't wind it. Some things are meant to stay still, a reminder that time only matters when you waste it. I wrote a final note under Rule 3. If life gives you the gift of ending cleanly, don't dirty it by reopening the wound. 2 months later, the foundation grew. Local media covered our work, calling it a restoration movement started by a man who rebuilt himself first. I didn't correct them. Maybe they were right. Catherine and I began to spend more time together, dinners after long days, quiet walks where neither of us said much. One evening, she said, "You know, you could teach again. Maybe start workshops. The architecture of second chances." I chuckled. Catchy. But I'm better at nails and beams than speeches. She tilted her head. Maybe. But sometimes, Nate, people need to see how a man stands after being knocked down. It gives them permission to do the same. I didn't answer, but her words stayed with me. Because deep down, I knew she was right. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a community center about resilience and rebuilding, not structures, but lives. I hesitated, then agreed. When I stood at that podium, facing a small crowd of people who looked like they'd been through their own wars, I didn't quote philosophers or architects. I just told the truth. You can't rebuild a house without clearing the debris first. And you can't rebuild yourself until you face what collapsed. Don't curse the demolition, thank it for showing you what was weak. The audience sat in silence. Then someone started clapping. I looked down at my hands, rough, scarred, and steady, the same hands that once trembled opening an email from a woman who ended my world. Now, those hands were building again. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. A year after Evelyn left, my life had settled into something simple, steady, and honest, the kind of peace that doesn't come with fanfare but feels earned in every breath. The Reclaim Foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. What started as one man fixing roofs had become a small movement: veterans, widows, young builders, all working side by side to restore homes and hope. Some evenings, when the sun dipped low behind the hills, I'd sit on the porch of the workshop and watch the crews pack up. Laughter echoed between the tools and lumber. It was the sound of purpose, not perfection, the kind that fills the spaces once occupied by anger. That's when I knew for sure, revenge fades, but purpose lasts. One afternoon, I was sanding an old table when Catherine walked in with 2 coffees and her usual calm authority. "You've officially gone local hero," she said. "Channel 9 wants to do a feature about you." I wiped the sawdust from my hands and smirked. "They can find bigger heroes. Not the quiet kind," she said, handing me a cup. "They want to talk about how you rebuilt your life after betrayal." I took a sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. If I agree, it's not going to be about betrayal. It's going to be about what comes after. She smiled. "That's exactly why they want you." The interview aired 2 weeks later. I didn't watch it live, but the next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop: messages from old colleagues, former clients, even people I hadn't spoken to in decades. One text caught my eye. "Evelyn. I saw your interview. You look different. I'm glad you found peace." I stared at it for a moment, then typed my reply. "Thank you. I hope you find yours too." That was it. No bitterness, no nostalgia, just a clean end to a long, tangled story. And for the first time, I meant it. Months passed. The foundation expanded to 3 cities. We built a small training center and named it the King Workshop, though everyone jokingly called it Nate's Place. On the wall, Catherine insisted we hang one of my favorite quotes. "Strong walls aren't built to keep people out, they're built to hold something worth protecting." That line became the motto of our work. On my 63rd birthday, the team surprised me with a gathering. Nothing fancy: barbecue, music, laughter. Someone had printed a banner that read, "Happy birthday to the man who rebuilt everything, even himself." I laughed until I almost cried. Not because of pride, but because for the first time, I felt surrounded by something real again: community, friendship, life. When the night wound down, Catherine handed me a small wrapped box. "Open it," she said. Inside was a watch, simple, silver, with the same inscription I'd once found on my father's old one. "Measure time by what you build, not by what you lose." I looked at her. "You remembered." "I remember everything you try to hide," she said with a grin. For a long moment, we sat there in silence, the kind that feels like understanding. A few weeks later, I visited my father's grave for the first time in years. The cemetery was quiet, the air heavy with early morning fog. I placed the old wristwatch beside his headstone, the one Evelyn had returned, and whispered, "You were right, Dad. It's not the walls that matter. It's the foundation." I stood there for a while, feeling the wind against my face, the weight of the years lifting like dust. Before leaving, I added softly, "And I think I finally built mine right this time." That night, back home, I opened my red notebook one last time. Its pages were full entries of pain, strategy, healing, and rebirth. But this page, I decided, would be the last. I wrote slowly, carefully, as if chiseling words into stone. Final entry: the last foundation. I once thought betrayal ended stories. I was wrong. It begins them. The moment Evelyn took everything, she unknowingly gave me something greater: clarity. I learned that love without respect rots, that forgiveness isn't weakness, and that silence, when used right, is louder than any scream. I've seen what revenge looks like. It's hollow. But just as quiet, measured, patient rebuilds everything it touches. If someday my story is told, I don't want it to be about loss or money. I want it to be about a man who learned that the greatest act of strength is to stay gentle when the world gives you every reason not to. I put the pen down and smiled. The notebook had started as Plan K in case of betrayal. Now, it ended as a blueprint for becoming whole. The next morning, as the sun crept through the workshop windows, I felt something I hadn't felt since before that fateful email, a sense of arrival. Not victory. Not vindication. Just arrival. I strapped on the new wristwatch, grabbed my tool belt and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the world alive with sound, hammers, laughter, music from the radio someone left on. Catherine waved from across the lot. Ready to build, old man? I smiled. Always. And as I walked toward the noise, the sawdust, and the morning light, I realized something simple and final. You can't undo betrayal. You can't rewrite the past. But you can build something stronger on top of it. And if you build it with truth, it will never fall again.